Alrighty. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Alexis Foley, and I serve as an educational program coordinator with the ACUHO-I. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Before we begin, I would like to share a few brief technical notes. If at any point you would like to unmute and contribute to this conversation, please use the raise hand feature located under the reactions button in Zoom on your Zoom screen. And we will be able to grant you access to utilize your audio because this is webinar format. Um, we also encourage you to engage throughout the session using the chat. You can also utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you have any questions throughout the session. I'll also note that at the bottom of your screen, if you'd like to enable your closed captioning, you can click on the More button at the bottom and click on Show Captions because they are enabled. Alrighty. So with that, today's conversation is going to explore how housing and residence life professionals can intentionally shape campus environments through policy, partnerships, programming, and the design of residential communities. Drawing from Strange and Banning's Campus Environments framework, our panelists today are going to share perspectives and examples from their work across a variety of institutional contexts. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our facilitator for today's conversation, Dr. David Hibbler Jr.
Thank you, Alexis, and welcome everyone. I'm Dr. David Hibbler Jr., and I serve as the Executive Director for Housing and Residence Life and Associate Dean of Students at the University of Chicago. This topic is especially meaningful to me because it sits at the intersection of two things I've been fascinated with for most of my life: people and places. When I was younger, I thought I wanted to be an architect. I was fascinated by buildings, design, and the ways that spaces came together. And what I didn't realize at the time is that I was equally also interested by the people who would eventually inhabit those spaces. Early in my career at Colorado State University, nestled against the Rocky Mountains, I had the privilege of actually learning from Dr. James Banning himself. And while I didn't fully appreciate it at the time, his work would give me the language for something that I had always been observing: environment shaped behavior, belonging, and human development. I saw firsthand at the University of South Florida as a first-time hall director. So near one of my residence halls was a small campus beach near a pond. It had fallen into disrepair. Students had largely ignored it. And after talking with some of my facilities colleagues, we were able to restore that beach, resand it, and then students began to study there, gathering there, and community started to begin to be built there. Admissions tours started to go there as well. The physical space changed, but more importantly, the meaning that students attached to that space changed as well. And then today, here at the University of Chicago, I see some of those same principles at work through our residential house system. Students often describe it as a Harry Potter-like experience, but what they're really describing is the intentional creation of identity, community, and belonging through environment. Nearly 5,000 students are organized into smaller communities within their own traditions, cultures, leadership structures, and gathering spaces. And even through our first year placement process, which they jokingly refer to as a sorting hat, which we know as Star Res. But students are, sorted into these different houses based on backgrounds, identities, interests, and academic and mostly academic disciplines. The goal is not to simply assign students into a residence hall, it's to create communities where relationships from across differences are formed, where critical inquiry extends beyond the classroom, and where the residential environment advances the educational mission of our college. The architecture matters, the people matter, the policies matter, and ultimately the meaning that students make from those experiences matter. That's why Strange and Banning's campus environments framework remains so powerful. It reminds us that student success is shaped not only by the programs we offer, but by the environments that we intentionally create. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by four outstanding professionals who will help us to explore those environments through the lenses of physical space, human relationships, organizational structures, and meaning making. So let's begin by meeting our panelists. Um, so first, we'll start off with Chris McDonald.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris McDonald. I currently serve as the Assistant Vice President for Student Success and Wellbeing at the University of Central Florida. I continue to work with housing and residence life, but also have the opportunity to work with the campus rec our student care centers and off-campus housing teams as well. Um, I primarily served in large universities, both primarily in rural areas. So that kind of informs a lot about my impression about students and belonging in environmental spaces on campus and the surrounding areas. Now experiencing a more of a suburban urban environment here in Orlando, which is kind of shaping some perspective for me as well. I'm happy to join you today.
Thank you, Chris.
I'll pass it off to Ray.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ray Abear. I'm the site director for Central Campus at Yale University. I work in central facilities, though the majority of my experience is in housing. Most recently, I've only been at Yale for 8 months. Previous to that, I was at Emory University in Atlanta as the director of housing facilities there. And before that, I worked at UConn and UMass in their housing departments, as well as public-private partnership at the University of Maryland with Capstone, also in facilities. So my kind of passions meet together in facilities and residential. So this is a great topic that I'm really passionate about. And most of my experience has also been at large publics. And it's really shaped my understanding of access, well-being, and I'm really excited to talk more about this.
Awesome. Thank you. I think we'll go to Ashley.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Merritt. I serve as the Director of Residence Life at American University. I've spent about 9 years in this field at a couple of different schools, ranging from PWIs to minority serving institutions and ranging from public to private. I've been in private institutions for majority of my career, actually, and I spent a lot of my focus and priorities around understanding the ways in which residential ecosystems are developed, and that highly encourages the concepts of encouraging environments to be a part of that conversation, not only for the students that we serve, but a lot of my focus is also on the professionals in which serve the students and the environments for them as well as live-in staff members. So very excited about this conversation today and talking about the human aggregator of it all.
Thank
And I
you.
will pass it off to our final panelists.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brandon Chandler. I serve as the Executive Director for University Housing and Residential Life at Temple University in Philadelphia. My background, I've been here at Temple for 7 years and about 2 weeks now. And prior to joining Temple, I spent about 15 or so years at Rutgers University in New Jersey at one of the smaller campuses there. Background mostly in residential life, but I took as moving through leadership positions, I've acquired conference services, housing operations and assignments during my time at Rutgers. We brought in our campus facilities team under housing at that time while I was there. So learning the facilities environment side of housing the hard way. And then when I left Rutgers to join Temple, I came here to lead the housing facilities unit that is underneath our residential life and housing umbrella. So again, got very intimate with physical environments and spaces, and how that now in my new role ties together to the overall residential experience for the campus.
All right. Thank you all for introducing yourselves, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation that we're going to have today. So, Ray, if you could kick us off, how do residential spaces and facilities communicate institutional values to students?
Yeah, I think the residential physical environment and the spaces within those buildings really speak volumes to showcasing what an institution wants to show as their values. Being in the physical environment, it touches all the senses. So, how does it smell? How does it feel? How does it protect you from the elements? Like, is it warm? Is it cool when you want it to be? Those are all things that kind of show care to students, especially, in their first months away from home. And those are things that growing up in the, hall director trainings that we kind of were told, like you're caring for people. And so that's what I loved about getting into facilities is it ties back a lot of those things. And so, you can't say that you value individuality when you're trying to place every area in a cookie cutter form. We're not, if you're not, you can't say you value inclusivity if you're not thinking about your access to ADA devices and resources and variety within your spaces. Our students over time have really uh, developed needs that are unique, that no longer fit in buildings that are 50 years old. And so we have to really push ourselves to develop those spaces continuously to meet those needs. And that's one way we do show that we live up to our values when we say them.
Ray, you just sent chills down. Like literally, this whole piece around like that's how we show care through our physical environment or just a way because we often don't put that language with some of the facilities or the hard pieces or like just the operational elements. So I just wrote that down and I'm going to be talking to my facilities folks about that literally right after this. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Ashley, how do student demographics, identities, and peer cultures shape residence life today?
Absolutely. So, thinking of environments as a tool for belonging, so to speak, when we think about the identities that our students are carrying, I think our students are arriving with more complex and intersectional identities than we've ever experienced. So, kind of playing off of what was mentioned, like the one size fits all does not anymore apply to the way that we're approaching building community for our students. And students are actually expecting our environments to honor and acknowledge and value where multiple identities come into play. So things such as how we're using that tool, things like themes, communities, affinity spaces, identity conscious programming are going to continue to grow to be important. So it's important to keep that flexibility at the forefront and being aware that that's going to matter, but also being clear when understanding the hierarchy of needs for our students with that physical concept being at the base and understanding that the way that I'm looking at my physical needs being met and how safety are coming into play, mental health concerns are also skyrocketing right now. So putting that together, being physically safe, being psychologically safe comes into play with how I see myself and how others see me. So that all coming together in that ecosystem that I mentioned is going to be important as you're seeing physical and social environments connected. So the question isn't whether we have community spaces, for example, but it's whether those spaces are intentionally designed to help me connect, help me belong, and help me thrive and grow.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, especially because I think sometimes people see those as competing and they don't have to be. And we can find a way for all of those things to be possible, right? Like the one cookie cutter approach won't be the thing that solves that. So thank you for that. Brandon, how do institutional policies and structures shape the residential student experience?
Now, David, I'm not going to lie. When I saw this question on my list, I was like, wow, this is like the grenade question in the group, right? Because it affects everything. The residential experience on a campus for most campuses touches every aspect of a student's life, but it weaves its way through every corner of the university. I saw this question. I was like, okay, policies and structures. And I was like, well, sometimes those things are good policies and structures. And then, there's people who work in really challenging environments where the structure is a hindrance at a lot of times. Some examples I thought of right away, they could be guardrails. They can help safeguard the student experience a lot of times. It provides a necessary conversational border sometimes with campus facilities. No pun intended or no dig at Ray. But sometimes the relationship with facilities works really well on a campus, and sometimes it doesn't. And those structural guardrails help to protect that experience that we're all looking to drive. It can have big impacts on first and lasting impressions from students and families, how they are treated through your organization's policies and structures, whether they're an incoming student and they feel like they're getting what they asked for, or they continue to run into barriers or areas that are understaffed by policy design, can leave a really deep impression. And sometimes us in residence life are the group that are really one of the first lines of defense and impression for the campus. And sometimes we're selling the institution all over again. It's like, no, 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 no. Financial aid really is doing their best, but hey, we've got this for you. We're going to like pull this together for you. So how well organized or how disorganized your university is can really have a big impact on people's impressions and where you get to start from as you're building your experience and going down the line that Ashley is talking about.
Thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate how you framed it. Like sometimes we just need guardrails to help us, kind of rein everything in and keep not only our students and our community members, in a good space, but also the institution itself. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Chris, the constructed environment is really about perception and meaning making. How have you observed students interpreting and making meaning of the same campus experience in different ways?
I thought this was a pretty compelling question, and I honestly I tried to reflect on it in the different campuses that in different campus communities I've been a part of. And what I think it kind of came down for me is recognizing that different students, if I want to try to create a binary, students look at them as either support or embellishment. And so students will see resources and opportunities as a priority for them, whether it be programs, resources, amenities, as supporting their individual success and opportunity from an access standpoint or just fulfillment of getting through the process of their education, or maybe even an inroad into a different opportunity, or they maybe even see it as almost an accessory to the overall college experience that they believe they should have available to them, or potentially even entitled to. Not entitled to as I deserve this, but as a consequence of the relationship that they have with an institution or a community. And I think it finds its way in different places. I think LLCs are a great example of that. For some, it's an avenue to an end road. Others, it's just, I need to find a place. This might be a good spot for me. I think we all see it. Some folks are just determined they have to be a part of this program, this community, regardless of its orientation. And others are like, yeah, I mean, I'll give that a shot. Or maybe this will, or they'll dip in or they'll dip out as they see fit. And I think this finds its way in being articulated from basic amenities, simple things, from whether or not I can afford to be in that high-end housing, or this is what I can afford, and what does this say about my experience or the potential of the community I have, be it organic or not. And then the engagements that might be available to me is being either heavily resourced or designed. Because I think right now we're all embroiled in conversations, unfortunately, at times about ROI on the kinds of things that we spend money on, whether it be within a design phase and a new build or a renovation, or it might just become the programmatic exercises that we do to try and maximize the benefits of the spaces we already have. And it's like, okay, well, how many students is this going to support? How many unique users is this going to support? And when we want to try and be, as Ashley referenced, really trying to connect different students and different identities that are far more diverse than we've ever experienced before, where at the same time those guardrails are being presented in different ways, like Brandon referenced, in that maybe those guardrails are being shrunk on us, whether or not we like it or not. And so it becomes more and more of a challenge. And so trying to find that support and embellishment balance can be a real challenge when looking at the different pieces of the campus experience.
Thank you. And I don't want to pick on you intentionally, but something also just came up for me right now. Because earlier you mentioned you've been on a variety of campuses, from more rural campuses to now urban, suburban environment, also in a large state system. I mean, I think UCF now has like, 80,000 people. I don't know.
We'll tip 70 this fall, yeah.
Yeah. So how have you also kind of navigated that same concept that you just talked about at the various types of institutions, knowing that ACUHO-I represents various institutions?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I started off at a small private at Loyola in Baltimore a long time ago. And that kind of shaped my expectations of what it meant to be a part of a residential community. Very, with intent, small natured, and then I went large land grant pretty much after that. And then lots of Appalachia, at WVU, Virginia Tech, places that really hone in on what that identity of that regionality is, but then also the resources available to it. And so it absolutely influences, and then also age and comportment of the kind of builds that you have. kind of what Ray was referencing earlier too, and also Brandon, but from a care perspective, the quality of the buildings are becoming even more as more of them becoming certain levels of disrepair, and the resources available to make them more available, be able to be used, or an indicator of how we actually care about you as an individual is something that we've never really had to encounter as much as we are today. I think that's uniform, but the size of the institution and the resources and the capacity we have to connect to the individual student need is definitely challenged based off of the scope of resources that you have.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's also a great segue into this, Ray. So, what design or operational decisions have most impacted belonging or well-being in the communities that you currently work with or have worked with in the past?
Yeah, and it's kind of been touched on a little bit on in different ways, but to me, it's that a balanced approach to making decisions on what gets done. It's not to say that, we're going to take 50% of our money and dedicate that to mechanical upgrades and 50% of that money and dedicate it to aesthetic upgrades, but it's finding a way to balance out, what needs are pressing and then what just needs to be done in order to keep things going and comfortable because residents do see, and especially like I said, this is my second private institution, my last private institution. There was a sense of like, what am I paying for? Like, I come into the building and I see this, like, is this what I'm paying for? And so and to just say like, well, then we're only going to focus on mechanicals would really hurt how students felt about in their connection to the institution. So really it's about trying to make the best decisions with balance in mind, because coming out of COVID, the big thing from institutions were about, health and safety only, health and safety only. Well, it was about trying to find a way to tell that story of replacing carpet in our fraternity houses with solid flooring is a health and safety concern. Let's go ahead and do this project. And kind of having some of those successes under your belt to kind of push things forward and saying, okay, now like here's another issue that may not be health and safety, but this is a building that's been highly neglected, and this is a $50,000 project that will really help turn students' mindset around what it feels like to live here. And it's trying to figure out how to tell that story of yeah, we're going to focus on the mechanicals because it can look great, but if the air conditioner doesn't work when it's hot, it doesn't matter. Students will not feel comfortable. They will not feel like they're having a good experience. And so always have to figure out, how are we going to do these projects? Because I always tell people it is never more inexpensive to do a project than it is today. And so we can kick the can down the road, but it will absolutely be more expensive. And I've experienced that time after time. And so it's a lot about storytelling, but it's a lot about here's where we're going to balance this out. And then trying to like hit that low level fruit to like pick and say, hey, we're going to make some improvements on this by doing this project.
Thank you, Ray. I appreciate that. I think oftentimes when we're talking about some of the facilities pieces and like one, we haven't done a great job of like storytelling and talking about like how it impacts student success, right? Like we have to balance the mission and the margin. We have to balance some of these upgrades of like replacing carpet with LVT is not only helping,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
the health and safety of the building, folks with allergens, just so many things, right? Also on our housekeeping staff of like turning over a space, cleaning it.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking about lighting. Some of our corridors aren't well lit. So that's a safety perspective, but also lighting in the buildings and the luminance can impact mental health concerns and just sense of belonging, all those pieces. So we're doing a light study this summer across,
Right.
spaces. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Ashley, how do you respond when community norms or peer dynamics undermine belonging?
So, not sure if many people know, but American University is in DC, Washington, DC. So, our students are very well prepared or well, more likely to have conversations about any and everything. So, our staff need to be equally as prepared. So, when harm is done, similar to that like hotel mentality, I can totally attest to that with was being shared earlier. But when something goes wrong in your hotel, you probably don't anticipate participating in the solution. But in this case, I expect our students to do so. So I think, honestly, when approaching this, like our first step is recognizing that belonging isn't just about who is included, but identifying behaviors, norms, dynamics that may be excluding others. So when these situations arise, like it's important for us to address them, but I focus on what's driving the behavior. So engaging students in conversations about the impact of their decisions, recentering around our shared values and expectations of the community. So the goal isn't simply to just correct behavior, but helping student understanding the roles that they play and how their actions contribute or detract from that environment overall. So ultimately, just like our physical spaces, belonging requires intentional and consistent maintenance. So what things that I would recommend is like auditing your environment and creating those feedback loops consistently, interrupting those spaces and not just ignoring when things are happening at a smaller level so that they don't become big ones. But lastly, making sure that a co-created community exists. So that environment that you are building is co-created with the students so that they play a role, they participate in the building and the solutions in which are occurring for the problems that exist around belonging.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that piece around like what feedback loops do we have we intentionally built into our space, making sure that we're addressing those little things, right? Because little things become big things. And sometimes we're like, I dealt with so many other things today, like that's small, like I won't have to it's low level. Actually, it's address it now. And then that co-creation piece is definitely huge. Our students, and I think just as our just generations in general, like they want to feel like they're a part of that space, and then they seek and they have more ownership of it. So appreciate that. Brandon, students often experience the university as one institution, even though we know it operates through many different departments and systems. Where have you seen organizational barriers emerge for students, and what partnerships have been most critical in creating a more seamless student experience?
David, again, I think the grenade question is back with me again. I mean, this could be everything. I was sitting here, I had a list prepared, and then I heard all of you talking. I was like, oh, I added 4 more groups to my list of things that I think could actually be barriers. I have so many notes. Like, I'm going to run down a litany of areas that I think my saying these things is more just to get people thinking about areas where barriers could exist for your campus. You may have a great process in one area and be really, really struggling in another. Kind of going back to the physical environment, thinking about policies and structures like your design standards and where they conflict with ADA needs. So, we are often in residential life and housing and assignments trying to work our way around what the buildings are that we've been given and trying to fit students' needs into different areas of buildings for access, egress, and things like that. So I definitely have seen areas where design standards, even for new buildings, are still not really meeting what students of today need. They might be meeting an ADA standard, but maybe not a student access standard that we really kind of need to have more conversation about. Areas with public safety, my campus is in the city, so public safety is a very high priority office relationship that we manage and we work with. But their approaches to inspections, confiscations, how they secure a building, how they train their people, create barriers and impediments for our students that we are constantly working through and managing. Deposits. Whether you require a housing deposit or a seat deposit at your institution, and have you looked at that amount and looked at that process recently? And if you combine that with some of what Ashley was talking about, co-creating and co-designing policies, co-creating and understanding the student's perspective on how a process works, you'll find that deposit, that $250 or that $50 or whatever it is for your campus, really could be a bigger barrier than you've given it credit for. And it may not mean all that much to most of us. Most of us give the deposit right back to them on their fall term bill. So what impediment have we created for a student that may not really be necessary anymore? Another area I was thinking about, which we're facing, Temple is a global university. We've got three physical campuses abroad, and we're expanding. Those programs are becoming very attractive to students. So where a traditional first-year student, now we would have expected them to land in Philadelphia first and then maybe trickle out over time. Some of those campuses have full 4-year programs now where you could go to Italy for all 4 years or Japan for all 4 years. Or you can go for a year and then come back. But what does that mean for a student who starts in Japan as a first-year student and then comes to Philadelphia to finish up, missing all of the first-year stuff that we invest heavily in to get them acclimated, and they're starting as a sophomore off everybody's radar. Same goes with like online proliferation. So the amount of students taking online classes, but still living in residence halls. We've got residency requirements that impacts. There's all these other kind of touch points that now we've created new barriers by trying to be more accessible, which is good. But we haven't kind of done the backtracking to see the ripple effects through our different areas and policies. So a lot of us are working on those things currently. The basics like form versus function, and I know this touches on everybody's comments, but something that looks good but doesn't work well. Something that's designed LEED silver, LEED gold, but doesn't give students the ability to control how hot or how cold they want to be readily enough. And even our policies or our stance on, do we own our housing? Do we just manage our housing, but someone else owns it and takes care of it? Or do we have a hands-off approach? And what does that do for barriers, for the student experience, for roommate conflicts, for paying rent and financial aid and all of the little things that when we own it ourselves and we understand the process, we kind of work through it a little more cleanly. But if you have a university that's really into P3s or really into let the market decide where it's going to go, what does that do for the student experience and what barriers does that create? I have 17 more, but that's where I'll stop.
Brandon, you just gave us a master class on like all things yeah, just like the logistics and all of the pieces behind or under the hood, right? I think for a while we've been talking about our universities are global communities, but now they're global campuses, right? You never know, like we may have multiple campuses across the country and the world, right? And where students are, what their entry points. When I was at USF, we were exploring, and I know Chris navigates this as well. Like, does a student start during the fall, summer, or in the spring, and like their entry point, how they come to acclimate to the university. So all of these things are changing in real time as the world is evolving, right? Things that are happening with the current administration is also impacting like how our students whether they show up here or, we were figuring out like, do they come to our U Chicago campus here in Chicago, or do you start in Hong Kong, or do you start in London? So yeah, all of these things are happening real time, and we have to adjust literally within days or weeks to make sure or make that experience seamless for our students and our families. So thank you for that. Chris, what programs or narratives have helped students feel purpose, connection, or ownership over their experience that you've seen at UCF or anywhere that you've been?
I think the first part of my response would be acknowledging and really recognizing that no shoe, no size fits all. There is, even though we might be finding more and more constraints depending on what resources you have in order to develop things that provide opportunities for different students with different identities or different needs or different wants. We can't try to find a way to funnel it all into one spot. That's usually never going to catch as many as you would hope it would be. And so trying to champion some diversification or to maintain some things that you find really valuable can be a hill to climb, but a hill worth climbing. I have to say I'm a perpetrator of that many times over. So this is my 5th campus and my 3rd at an ED level or above. And so I feel like all of my different experiences have shaped my perspective, but I also have my favorites. I still remember, heck, I even talked about a program I did 25 years ago at Loyola that I still talk about today because I just thought it was really cool. I mean, who wouldn't want to go around Baltimore in a limousine doing a scavenger hunt. I mean, how cool is that? But who's got resources to send 40 kids around in limousines around a city? But what was the aspect of that program or other programs like it that made it attractive, made it significant, or make them significant? So I I want to control for saying living learning programs in a residential space, living learning programs. I don't want to spend too much time talking about that because I think we can all openly acknowledge for many students, those are phenomenal access points that make them feel connected as a part of a smaller community and also potentially the larger community and feeling really congruent to what it means to be a part of that institution that they're a part of. So I'd rather focus on some other things where I think it's the nuts and bolts pieces. And it really does begin and end for me on floor-based, low-level engagement pieces that help pick up the pieces that don't get all the resources. And so it's from floor-based, low-level engagement to building-based signature programs. I inherited buildings even in graduate school and my first couple jobs that had already been established. And so, sometimes your first thing is I want to express myself. I want to feel a sense of ownership and dominion. How can I come up with my own stuff? Well, if you've got an 80% participation rate in something and you were able to kind of cultivate it as your population changes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just make it a little bit better, make it a little bit different based off of who your students might be. And much like Ashley was referencing earlier, as long as you find ways for them to participate in the design and execution of those things, then it becomes theirs just as much as was someone else's a decade before. And so there are different programs that I believe were pretty signature in my experience in understanding how communities connect people that either I helped facilitate or I helped watch. And I love the big things. I love the big things that make students identify because even if they don't participate, sometimes just the mere fact that they can or it's there can be really significant, and it signifies to them a value of contribution that an institution has to an experience. And if resources do continue to get shrunk, really finding a way to leverage those more significant experiences are going to become more and more important. I think anything that I call anything beyond the constant. The one thing all students have constant on a college campus is they go to class. And so anything that you can do beyond the class to me has an opportunity to be significant to students, and whether it be the individual student or not. And sometimes it's not some data that you can capture. I value and I appreciate metrics, but there are times when those other things, and so we focus, and I'm grateful to have a really strong team that really does focus on how we are supporting our undergraduate leaders in doing what I call the second and third extra, whether it be the second and third question, the second and third follow-up. So even if you have that introvert who doesn't necessarily want to be engaged in everything, sometimes they will communicate, and we've all probably had it where, I didn't play it all, but the mere fact that Billy came by at least 3 times a month or said, checking on me or whatever, I knew if I needed him or something like that. And so that sense of belonging can be about happenstance or it can be a really profound experience. And so finding a way to put out those nets and try to find as many ways to catch them as possible. So I do think it can begin. I believe in institutional-wide wonderful experiences, but not everybody can go to a football game. Not everybody can go to the concert. Not everybody's going to show up to that homecoming event. But all those little things, if we're talking about residential space, is what do you do to create those opportunities, small, low-level environments, those intimate spaces, those intimate opportunities in the hall. To me, it ends and begins with that. So if you don't have that, then you're going to have a real hard time making people feel part of the bigger if they don't feel part of the small.
Thank you for that. Right. I mean, and just that the reminders of just it's the big things, but it's also those small things. I talk to my staff also about just it's the small hellos, right? Like in an elevator, like sometimes like I just have my AirPods in, but like talking to our student staff, like, hey, take your AirPod out, engage with somebody, right? Like it may be the one interaction that can, change a day, right? That may not have gone the way that, some of our students had expected, but just that little moment in between floors 3 and 8, right? Could mean all
Well, I mean, because I've read stories about Yale before, so I know about their system, and I know you have the house system there. My understanding is most students at Chicago and Yale, they identify more with the house than they even do the institution.
They
And
do.
so
Yeah.
when that's a part of it, I mean, oh yeah, I went to Yale, but I was blank house, or is this, I mean, that to me indemnifies the absolute that the smaller makes the bigger possible. Yes, homecomings are awesome. Football concerts, all that, a speaker series. So tying into those resources and making that avenue for your smaller to go to the larger, absolutely do it. But you got to maintain the smaller. You got to.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna, and I can't take credit for this. This was Thomas Miller back at USF. I want to say 2013, 2014. USF at that time was 47,000 students. He was like, "It's our job to make USF human scale." And that just really has resonated with me throughout my career, right? Like whether I'm at a larger institution or I'm talking about the house system here at U Chicago, how can I make it human scale? Where like I'm known by name and by story, whether that's through intentional conversations, whether it's we're also in a urban environment, so all of our desks are staffed 24/7 by staff members who have worked here longer than I've been alive. I've been given a Ruby service pin recently. I think that's 40
Wow.
years. But folks, some of those folks at the front desk knowing our students by name and by story, greeting them in the mornings, greeting them when they come home, whether it's at lunch or in the evenings. And they just make all the difference. Or seeing them when they graduate, because we also have we have main convocation, but then our diploma ceremonies, they're by house, right? So you come into your house and then you also depart the university through your house as well. So yeah, thank you. So I would like to wrap up this portion of our time together with one final question for everyone. Um, Students can live in the same residence hall, experience the same policies, and attend the same programs, yet walk away with very different perceptions of their experience. From your perspectives, what most shapes whether a student comes to believe they belong, matter, and can succeed on a campus?
I mean, I can jump in and say, I think for me, it's a daily like check on how we're serving them, like how we're supporting them on a regular basis, not just as a community, but as individuals. When they run into roadblocks in the physical environment, like how are we helping take those roadblocks down? And that's not just for the student, but it's also for the staff, the live-in staff. Like, how are we taking care of their homes? Our RA staff, how are we setting up the environment to help them do a program at the last minute or, have furniture that's easy to move around so that they can do an event with minimal impact? Because students are busy. Our live-in staff are busy. How can we make sure that something that seems small to us, like the HVAC unit is making a high pitched sound in my apartment. Like, can someone come address this? Yeah, let's get on that. How are we serving them every day to help them feel like they're being heard? Because when they're being heard, they're feeling served, and that's how they're going to walk away feeling like they belonged.
Yeah, I would kind of add on to that. I think a lot about cultural gatekeeping. Where is the culture most likely to be shaped, and at what level is it shaped in a good way? Is it potentially altered or impacted in a negative way? Does that lay with my resident assistants? Does it lay with the desk assistants that are impacting the culture in which belonging is being felt as you're first walking into the hall? Is it with the hall directors, community directors, et cetera? And how, as leadership, are we facilitating that conversation about what it means to belong? Are we facilitating it for students and staff members so that that is trickling down? And sometimes it also is about being transparent about things you wouldn't even think that they would need to know, like talking about retention concepts and factors. So what are some most likely to be at risk? What are some reasons why a student would be at risk so that that mindset comes to life in other aspects of the roles and ways in which we may be talking about expecting them to know those things and build how they approach programs and intentional interactions around those things, but without saying that and making sure that we're consistent with that message can really come into play about how we understand belonging and even what success metrics lead up to what belonging should look and feel like.
I was listening to the way you framed the question, and David, and my mind still went right back to one of the notes I wrote to prepare for this, which was, a student or a group of students can go through a similar university, a similar residential program, same policies, and come away with very different expectations because they're diverse, right? There's a lot of things going on in their background, in their mind, in their experience that feed on what they see and what they do every day. But that's the biggest reminder to all of us that diversity still matters. It matters in who works on our campuses. It matters in how we craft policy, how we train our staff. A student needs to see themselves where they're going. Everybody gets to a point where they need someone to reach out to, and the most comfortable person a lot of people will find is someone that they perceive to be the most like themselves. So we need to make sure that we are still doing that work, not just residential life, not just student affairs, but the institution as a whole, and remembering that the business community still says that diverse workforces turn out the best results. It still matters in higher education that diverse workforces, diverse training, diverse experiences turn out the best students. We can't get away from that really, really basic fundamental truth.
I think the only thing I would add, no, yeah, well, and they should, and I think that's interesting because that's one of the things that I reference is what is the tone of what we communicate about belonging? Are we speaking it or are we showing it? And it's very easy to talk about. It's in a lot of our language now. It's one of our terms in the last 5 or 6 years that finds itself being a lot more prominent, and it can be really difficult to really represent that for a lot of different students and their stakeholders that we can communicate with. And so for me, kind of speaking a little bit off and on to what a lot of folks have talked about is I want to try, because I can't make everything work perfectly all the time. And because all the spaces can't fit everyone all the time, it's important as you do get the feedback that you get, and if they're contributing something, that you find a way to respond to it and not just acknowledge it, but also acknowledge your weakness. If we've not done something well, then it's not up to us to find a way to put a spin on it and make it not seem as bad as it is. It may not be as bad as someone might be presenting to you, but it doesn't mean to your perception, but their perception is their reality and their experience. And so whether it be a facilities issue or a roommate experience or a problem somewhere else, how do you respond to that? And how do you engage with them on that? To me, is some of the bigger signifiers of belonging that I've been responded to. I've not been just shuffled somewhere else. Whether whomever is communicating with me, whether it be a student staff leader, all the way up to my office or beyond, how are they being engaged with? Is it timely? Is it empathetic? Is it just boilerplate? How am I being responded to? And that makes me, in my most trying times, feel like I am being cared for. And that's something that we don't succeed in every time. And when we don't, we have to figure out, okay, well, how do we do better the next time, or how do we go better with that student or that stakeholder? So that tone and showing it, not just speaking.
Thank you. You all have just really dropped a lot of nuggets, and I would just really appreciate that. From I mean, even the pieces of just like reminding us around our staff experience, right? I think so often we're just focused on our student success and the student experience that sometimes we forget or neglect the staff, right? And also, I think as the workforce has shifted over the past few years after COVID and all the things and everything that we could say right now about. I think we also have the most generations in the workplace right now, right? Like student success does not have to come at the expense of staff success. So I just really appreciate all the examples that were provided, but Ray and Ashley's focus on those. So thank you for that. I think what strikes me from this conversation is that no single dimension operates in isolation. Student success is shaped by spaces, people, structures, and meaning making working together. So with that, I think we have time for one question from the audience. So this is coming from Diana. So what role do you see that housing should or could play in the new student orientation process that could help shape the minds of our new students? So this is for anyone.
One thing that I was really proud of when I was at the University of Richmond, I spent about 4 years there. We shifted the concepts around our first floor meetings and how that is infused with student orientation. So we actually pulled our entire team, so the housing and residence life side, to do a presentation for all of the first year students. But instead of going back to your halls for a first year floor meeting, they all went into our large quad. for many reasons, and they came together. We removed the paper checklist of here are what all of the things you need to make sure you follow and the rules and things of that nature, but it was their first memory of community building on campus in our most utilized environment, which was our quad at the time. And they could actually look around the quad to see what it would look like for that space to be fully active. And I think that that visionary, but also that experience, taking away the traditional concept of a floor meeting, so that can be used less for here are all of the rules, but more of here's everyone, here's how we want to shape this community together, that co-creation I mentioned. And I think it really helps shape the mind of the student about the environment, but also about the concept of their first memory of building community.
I'm not sure what different levels people having. For us at Temple, we and New Student Family Programs, who runs orientation, we work very closely together through their entire series of summer orientations. Being large, we break them down, so there's a dozen of them throughout the summer. I don't want to forget to tell people just to make sure that folks are having fun, right? That's a really big key thing about, as a high school student, I happen to be a parent of a almost college student, and the gauntlet of paper and applications and the rigmarole of trying to get to the point of selecting an institution. And then before you've graduated, you're worrying about placement testing and selecting housing and all these things. By the time they get to orientation, some people are literally fried from the experience of just getting in. Don't forget to throw fun in there. So get them engaged and get them ready to be that fun, ready to meet people, ready to find new friends student that you want them to be when they get there in August or September, for those of you in September. But set the stage for them to really enjoy that experience, because that is really, as long as we've cleaned it well, we've maintained it well, we've created an efficient, organized process for them to get from home to our campus. If we've done all of that well and didn't make them wait outside in the heat for hours on end, they should be about ready to have fun. And that is where our work really begins, because if they start having fun, they start getting involved in things, they start engaging with professors in the academic community, and everything should pick up from there. But don't forget to infuse the fun.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when I was on the residential side, I was lucky to have the opportunity at UMass to be a part of orientation. And our role, because we were kind of bifurcated between the operations side and the residential side, the operations side really focused on like the meat and potatoes of the process, like housing selection, and this is what this and that, like this is how it works. And then we got to go in from the residential side and talk a lot about the experience and what kind of helps set some of those expectations that a lot of the panelists have talked about, starting the ball rolling on what the experience is going to be like, so that students feel like they've right-sized their expectations. And it was a great experience because we really got to connect with those students as hall directors from the beginning and kind of talk about what our roles were so that they didn't feel intimidated by walking in the building and who's this adult, like who's this person, like and really get to, like Brent said, get the fun rolling, because that's what is the great part about living in the residence halls, and the college experience is the fun part. It's the part you remember, a lot of the parts you remember, I guess, for most. So,
the only thing I want to add is I've worked at a lot of different places where I've had an opportunity to be, or even housing has had a different opportunity to be placed within the orientation schedule, from really significant to our own session and engaging with students and their parents alike, or to a minimal piece where you got a 5-minute clip of an overall that includes other auxiliary elements. And so I think when you have that, and we still want to attend to everything my colleagues have said about the value of this experience, and we all know it to be, as okay, so then where do we find our spot? And so if it has to be prior to orientation, or what other avenues can you communicate both the fun, the resources, the support, the experience? I'm not the most social media savvy person, but I have some amazing folks that are. And so how do they facilitate things throughout the year that can then be found by anybody to show that those fun pieces exist? How do we present our spaces that they actually might be able to set their eyes on? How do we set those rooms? What do we put in those rooms during tour times to make them know that this is not a static environment,
Yeah.
that it is something that can be dynamically theirs. The style of housing you have can also impact that orientation experience. We talked, heard from Ray and David about the different house systems and how many of those are designed to have some really intimate moments in different spaces. I have a lot of suites and apartments. I have zero traditional housing of over 7,500 beds. And so when I don't have lounges on floors and we don't have those things. So how do we bring spaces to life that may not be, that a lot of, especially incoming first year students might likely see, whether in the rest of the state of Florida or anywhere else for that matter. So you have to find those ways. If they don't think it's your lane to be that involved in orientation, find your spot. You'll have some spot, find that spot and try to communicate what you can about the kind of outcome that you want them to have as far as an experience with you.
Mhm. I really appreciate all the comments that you all just shared. And I think something that I'm taking away from that is just the fun, the memories, the experiences. And when I'm thinking about just like building blocks, I don't know why. I see that the fun and the memories kind of as the mortar in between just like this creation of a sense of belonging and just like me and welcoming me to campus. And I mean, we could have all these building blocks, but I think these memories and these fun experiences are just like the things that are holding all of those unique experiences together. So I don't know, that's how I saw it in my head. So thank you so much for this time together. Panelists, you all have been phenomenal. I just want to thank the audience for being here, the question that we just got. And on that note, I want to turn it back over to Alexis at the ACUHO-I office. So
Thank you so much, David. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you for sharing your time, your expertise, and your perspectives today. This was a great conversation. I also want to thank our ACUHO-I One committee, who this webinar is brought to you by. Ashley is our chair for that committee. It's a group that highlights the lived experiences of professionals and students on campus. We try to do programming that focuses on creating welcoming, supportive communities for our staff and for our students. So thank you to that committee. ACUHO-I will have more upcoming events, so you can check those out using the link in the chat there. And a recording of today's webinar will be made available on our ACUHO-I webinar, on our ACUHO-I YouTube channel. I'm sorry. So if you have any feedback, please feel free to share that with us. Other than that, have a great afternoon. Thank you for spending your time with us.